I am here today with this chonky NAS from UGreen. So UGreen wanted a sponsor video taking a look at their new NASync series. I thought this guy might be a good fit for Proxmox, the things I do, so I agreed to take a look at it. I am going to do a full teardown of this unit in this video, so down there's a timestamp where you can see the full teardown, all the hardware involved, all that kind of good stuff. Feel free to jump around as you want to see different things. So let's get on to the video. So before we get too far, let's take a look at the features of the model I have and how they compare to the rest of the family. So I got pictures of the family here on their website. So there's a lot of marketing here, up to 184 terabytes of storage, dual 10 gig, dual Thunderbolt, Core i5. That's the max configuration. So these different models don't all have all of these features. That's why you should really scroll down to the bottom to the specifications to see what each of these models have. So the one that I have today is the DXP4800 Plus. That's this guy right here. So looking at the CPUs, the lower end models, the 2800, the 4800, those both have the Intel N100. That's a very popular chipset in the home lab community right now. So that's 4-core, 4-thread. Now the 4800 Plus that I have has the same 4-bay form factor, but an Intel Pentium processor instead of the N100. Now the higher end 6 and 8-bay, as well as the NVMe version, those three have a Core i5. So this one that I have today does not have the Core i5. All of the models come out of the box with 8 gigs of DDR5. It says they all support on-die ECC, but that's kind of a requirement for DDR5. So basically everyone that uses DDR5 is trying to advertise how it is ECC now. This is not the same as server ECC. So in DDR4, a normal stick of memory has 8 memory chips. Each of these is 8 bits. That adds up to 64 bits of memory. With ECC, there's one extra chip, so 9 chips, that gives us 72 bits of memory. Those extra 8 bits make up a 7264 Hamming code, which can be used to correct single-bit errors and detect double-bit errors. So it's called SecDed. In DDR5, we have 2 lanes of 32 bits instead of 1 lane of 64 bits. So we could make ECC with 10 memory chips, because now we need 7 bits to do ECC with our Hamming code. And server DDR5 does have those 10 chips. But DDR5 memory is also pushing silicon really to its limits. And there's a lot more memory errors because of how hard DDR5 is being pushed. So now the memory die itself has on-die ECC in DDR5. And this means that the DDR5 memory chip has extra bits internally to do some sort of Hamming code of its own. So while it is true that this does have ECC memory, it's the same ECC you get from DDR5 normally. It's not server ECC. So limits here on RAM upgrade, that mostly comes down to Intel, being Intel. The low-end ones have eMMC, the higher-end ones have SSD, so my model has 128 gig SSD. They obviously have different numbers of drive bays and M.2 slots. For networking, it varies from 1 2.5 gig. This is an Intel i226, and it can get as high as 2 10 gigs. These are Aquantia AQC 114, I believe. So these can do multi-gig as well. And obviously only the models with a Core i5 can do Thunderbolt because it's not a feature on these lower-end Intel processors. So here is everything that UGreen has sent to me for this review. So we have a box of the NAS itself, and these 2 boxes each contain hard drives. I assume these are the ones they're going to bundle with it if they sell hard drives included, because they've branded the box, but I'm not entirely sure. So here's their branded hard drive box. And it's just 2 WD Red Plus NAS drives. And I have another box, so I have 4 of them. Now on to the main unit. It's got another box inside. So here's what we got for the box. NASync. The one they chose to send me was the 4800, sort of middle of the road. So it's a 4-bay unit. It's not their all NVMe, it's not their low end. It's got a good representation of the features, I think. It's got a box of accessories here. Manual and warranty card, you can just throw that out. Power adapter, Ethernet cable, screwdriver. I feel like thermal pads. They're really thick. I would guess they're like 6 mils thick. They're a little bit gooey. This is probably for the M.2s, although 6 mil of thermal pad is probably not going to be terribly effective. So power brick. It's got some warnings on it. Looks like it is 19 volt, 150 watt. So this is very similar to a laptop brick. My little second camera here is too short, so you just have to trust me. This guy's pretty heavy here. So The dust filter should just stick on. Just stick on, yeah, okay. So taking a look at the back. So we have HDMI, USB 3, USB 2, 2.5 gig, 10 gig. I'll have to test and see if this does multi-gig as well or just 1 and 10. And DC 19 volt. So because it has HDMI, I'm hoping we can flash Linux on it, but we'll get to that later in the video. I cannot underestimate how chunky this guy is. It feels very metal. So there's a plate on the bottom. I'm guessing the plate on the bottom is where the NVMEs are, but I didn't read the manual, of course. SD card reader. Maybe that'll be useful for me to do ingest. Drive trays appear to be toolless. There's a little rubber isolator here and a little nubbin that's molded into it. So it looks like we open them like that. That just makes them wide enough to fit the drive in, and then we close them up. I'm guessing these little keys here are for those drive locks. So let's see if that's true. So if I lock this, and then I turn the key, yeah, then I can't push the button. So drive locks like this mostly just prevent accidents. Someone's not pulling the drive out unintentionally. They're not very hard to bypass. Obviously a screwdriver, probably even a fingernail would do it. So that's what came in the box. I am going to do a full teardown, show you what's inside, all the expandability, all the non-expandability, etc. Before I do that though, I'm going to test it with its original software just to make sure everything's working right. So let's get on to that now. So I spent some time putting 4 hard drives in their toolless drive bays. I set the NAS up on my network. I've got it connected with 10 gigs to my 10 gig switch. That's over a 10G-based T, RJ45. And then from there I have 10 gigs fiber to one of my testing servers, so we can do full 10 gig bandwidth testing. But let's see what the software looks like in here. So here we are. This is what we get when our first time setting it up. So I have the DXP4800 Plus, so that's its model number. So I guess we'll call this thing the green machine. Looks like the R kind of got misplaced. I am Applard, I need a random password, yeah, sure, whatever. Mobile phone number, so that gets me, I don't know if I want to do that, especially not WeChat, so we're going to skip that step. And we're not going to share data, and we are going to install updates. So it is a new day. I let the green machine run automatic updates. I couldn't find a way to force an update, but I just left it power on overnight with updates enabled, and it came back and it was updated. So let's take a look at the software. So over here we have some basic apps. It kind of looks like a desktop. So I got my account. I'm Applard, the account I created in the setup process. I can see my CPU RAM usage. They're not that high right now. Notifications. So it's telling me I need a storage pool to store data. That makes sense. It just did an update. That also makes sense. Then we have some apps. So the apps it comes with: File Manager, Task Manager, Control Panel, Storage Manager. These are the ones you're probably going to use most of the time. So File Manager, we can see our files, but I don't have any storage defined yet, so I can't see any files. Task Manager, we can see what's using our CPU, network, etc. Control Panel is where we have settings. So for example, I can go to network here. It shows I have a default gateway both v4 and v6, and I'm connected on LAN 1. It negotiated 5 gigabits. I'm connected on LAN 1, by the way, which is the Aquantia 10 gigabit NIC. So that NIC can do multi-gig. So it can do 10 meg, 100 meg, gigabit, 2.55, 10 gig. And with multi-gig NICs, they negotiate their fractional rate, 2.5, 5, or 10, which is the fractional rate from 10 gig, based on the cable quality. So in my case, I have Cat 5, not Cat 5e. I knew ahead of time it would probably negotiate 5 gig because all of my devices that support this negotiate 5 gig, and it did. So it's better than 2.5 gig, but it's what my cable quality can do. That's pretty standard for 10 gig devices. But there are still 10 gig chips out there that don't support multi-gig, so it's good to see this one does support multi-gig. And IPv6 works entirely correctly. So I'm connected over v6 right now. I just typed that address in there and it's happy. Some other services that are useful: if we go into terminal here, we can enable SSH. And I'll come back to this one later, but I'm just going to enable it now so we notice it. So we can change some power settings from here, so including like auto boot after power on. No need to go into the BIOS for that. So that's nice. I'm not enabling hard disk sleep, but you can set that here if you want to. In general, for my use cases, I don't recommend hard drive sleep because hard drive sleep causes wear on the drives from spinning up and down. But if you really are using your data infrequently, it might be okay to do. And UPS. So they have some supported UPSs they can integrate with over USB. I don't have one of those to test with, so I'm not going to test it. So some other things we can do here, if we go to portal settings, we can change what port it's on. And I would really like this to be on the normal 443. Oh, it doesn't want me to set a low number of port. What the hell is that about? So anyway, I would really like devices to use standard port numbers like 80 and 443. I don't get this whole using wildcard ports. People are still going to find your port. It doesn't matter, use standard ports. So anyway, that's an irritation. Advanced settings, so use HTTP 2. I enabled that earlier, so that's enabled now. We'll just cancel out of here. Also, by default, none of these services are enabled. So you're probably going to want to come here and enable SMB service. Almost guaranteed you're going to want SMB. Maybe you want FTP. Oh yeah, we'll save that. Maybe you want FTP or NFS as well. Bonjour service, yeah, that one's helpful. But SMB is going to be the one you're definitely going to want to enable if you're actually using this for files. So it disabled SMB1, which is good. We could bump it up to SMB3 as our minimum if we wanted. So now that we've seen some of the software features, let's create a pool and share that pool. So I come over here to Storage Manager, and it says, welcome, yeah, let's create a wizard. So options are RAID type, disks, and if we want to do a disk test. So they suggest RAID 5. Since this is a 4-drive unit, RAID 5 probably makes sense. Out of 4 drives, you lose 1 drive in capacity, so you get 3 drives worth usable. Another really good option is RAID 10, so that's mirrors of stripes. So pairs of drives get paired together for redundancy, and then those two get merged. I tend to like striped mirrors, RAID 10, but RAID 5 is also a good choice. If you're doing a backup system, where this is the second copy of data, usually you tolerate a bit less redundancy for the backup system. In that case, a RAID 5 would also make sense. So then disks, I'll just pick all of them. And do I want to do a test? Well, a test is going to take 3 to 5 days, so I think that's going to be a no. And then, so we're going to say full size, it defaulted to the full size, and ButterFS. So ButterFS gives us the ability to do snapshots. Now, ButterFS themselves don't really recommend using RAID 5 in production yet. However, I checked, and under the hood, UGreen is not using ButterFS to do RAID. They're using Linux MD. So whether or not you choose ext4 or ButterFS, you're going to use MD RAID through the actual RAID bit, and ButterFS is just going to be used for snapshots. So we'll let it do ButterFS, and accept, delete all data, and now it asks for my password. So this is something that I really like. When you do dangerous things, it makes you type your password in again. So if you create storage pools, wipe drives, basically anything that's going to delete a large amount of data at once, you got to re-enter your password. Google could take some notes about this. Ask Linus about that one. So now that I've got my pool here, I've got 10.8 terabytes usable. So that's from 4 terabyte drives with RAID. We can create some files. So in my shared folders, I'm going to make a new shared folder. We're going to call it project. And we're going to put it on volume 1, and I can give it a capacity limit. I don't know, 400 gigs seem reasonable. And let's create that. So it's going to let me choose what I want to do. So my default is read and write. Here we are in Windows. I can see my folder, make a new text file. It did ask me for permissions to get here. I just didn't show you that, me typing my password in. If I come back here, and I go back in, there we go, there's my file. I don't know what that is. So as a NAS, storing data over Samba, FTP, NFS, this does the job. It's got a UI to configure all of your shares, user permissions, the stuff you'd come to expect from a basic NAS. But what does it do on the more advanced front? So for that we have the App Center. So here are what we have to install. So some of them come by default, so control file, file manager, logs, etc. Those are all by default. Sync and backup, we could try to install text editor, photos. So this is the entire list of what they have so far. So I did not try the sync and backup utility, but there is a thick client available for Windows and for macOS, and I believe that's for the backup system, but that's not something I would use, so I didn't test it. As for things you're probably going to want, like basically any other app or container, you're probably not going to find it in here yet. I'm not sure what their plans are for expanding this library, but later in the video I'll talk about how to install third-party software. So we also have the log center. We can look at logs, so this is important stuff that happened. If you need to see logs, and support. So if you need any support, you can search the knowledge base directly on the device. So next up, let's tear this guy down and see what the hardware looks like. So the time has come to take this guy apart. Got my iFixit toolkit. Let's get started. I also noticed now these drive bays have a number directly on the bay. So if you move them around, you'll end up where they're out of order. That would drive me absolutely crazy, but I guess if you're troubleshooting, that might be helpful. Okay, so with the discs out, we can see the SATA backplane in there and the fan. So there's a fan, obviously. So 4 SATA ports, not much else to see. So our first victim are going to be these screws on the bottom. Okay. So it looks like under this bottom cover, we have all of the expansion in the system. So there's 1 stick of RAM populated, 1 stick of RAM empty. I understand it's expandable, but it would be nice to see both memory channels populated. I believe this is a dual channel chip. I guess I'll put that on the screen down below. You have 2 NVMe slots. These are both M key. And then these here, this is labeled JMCU1. It's a 5-pin header, and that's labeled UART. That's a 3-pin header. So I guess you could use that for serial booting or things like that. This RAM stick it came with is from Samsung. So 4800 mega transfers. It's not bad. 8 gigs. So I assume that's where they wanted me to end the teardown, but I'm going to go deep and let's see what else we can find. So it looks like there's some screws behind some here. So let's get this flathead out. I took off the magnetic grill. Come on. What do we got? And we've got a Phillips. It's a screw. I'm a big fan of Torx myself, but I know the PC industry is not caught up with the times yet. So now the question is, how does the back come off? Do I pull the front out or tip it over? I'm going to lose all the screws. I think I could poke it through here with a flathead. Budger probably would have done similarly. Okay, so some plastic retention things, but they're just for friction. They're not like snaps or anything. Here's the magnets that hold on that fan grill. So here's what we got now. So we got the fan. Whatever this is on the side is held in, and then that's got a warranty seal with some Chinese characters that I don't know that language. So I'm not really sure if it's going to slide down or if it's going to slide up. So should I be taking these screws out or the ones under the sticker? I'm guessing the one under the sticker, but I don't want to take that one off yet. So this plate just bridges 2 pieces, so it looks like these are part of the enclosure, and this piece moves. I'm going to guess it goes down. Take the case off. There we go. That did not sound super happy. So there's clearly like a white area on the PCB that's masked with these white lines that users are supposed to access. They've added this foam sealing so you don't really get out of the way on accident. This must be the boot drive. That's the Phison controller. So it's a 128 gig SSD. That's the boot drive. So that's not user replaceable, but of course we can replace it now that we opened it. There's really no other chips at all on this side. So there's these 2 EMI pads for shielding. There's all these components. They're all on the other side of the board. So I really have to take this apart if I want to get in there. Something to be aware of now, this is the footprint for a PCIe connector from the other side. So if we look down in here, we can see the back plane for the drives is stuck in a PCIe slot there. So as we pull this out, we're going to be fighting that. We're also going to be fighting the fact that the motherboard goes into the front of the case. So I bet my best bet's going to be to pull up on the back. Ooh, I can't do that either because the connectors on the back are protruding through. Realistically, if you buy one of these, I've already torn it down enough to get all the parts. The only part you really need to dig into to service could be this boot SSD. If you're installing your own OS, you might need to modify that. Or you might want to just put something else there. There doesn't appear to be anything else useful to anyone on the top side, but I'm still going to tear it down anyway and see what's up there. Make sure you keep your screws organized, by the way. I've already got The external case screws, these guys. These new ones are plastic self-tapping screws. So it's definitely rather well built. Definitely not feeling like this is a low-end build quality. Almost all of these pieces are metal. So you got the drive cage, is a complete housing, the external shell. The only thing that's plastic is the front and back. So with that done, can I pull the motherboard off? No, not yet. What am I stuck on? I got one screw right here. I can start to pry at this connector here. And I should be able to pull these connectors out of the back. Get out, get out, get out, get out, and fan header. Okay, we're free. So under this will be the Intel SoC. I don't remember exactly what model it is, but I'll put that on screen. Looks like we have a BIOS battery, a buzzer, fan header for the CPU fan header for the case fan. So that's the 10 gig NIC. It's under a heatsink. I'm not going to take the heatsink off. That's going to be the i226 NIC. This guy here, ITE8613. I believe that's the watchdog, and it also does a few other things. These will be the VRMs, so this looks like a 4-stage VRM. Maybe some of those are memory, I don't know. So that's power. This is probably power. So 19 volt comes in, so that's probably 12 volt supply. That'll be the CPU supply. These are inductors as well. It's also interesting to note all of these connectors straddle the PCB. I don't know if I can make this clear to you, but they go through the PCB, which is a bit unique. So this connector here is labeled. It's labeled SATA board. I'm not sure if this is actually PCIe or not. Regardless, though, you've got all these M.2s here that are PCIe if you need more PCIe. And I guess we can figure that out pretty easily by pulling over the drive cage. So we take a look down here, you'll see there is a chip up here, and that's the ASMedia chip. So that's the SATA controller. That means that this header here is carrying PCI Express. Hopefully they use a standard pinout for that. I'm going to assume they did, I guess. So now I just got to put it back together so it works again. So me and the NAS are down here. We're going to try to boot Debian Linux. I figure if I can get Debian booted and installed, Proxmox and TrueNAS, they're both Debian-based, they shouldn't have a problem either. So I hooked up a monitor and it goes straight into the UGreen grub loader without trying any other boot devices. So I put in my Ventoy flash drive, I've got a Debian image picked in the PyKVM, it's not booting either of those. So my options now are to try to see if I can get in via the serial port or take it apart and pull out that 128 gig boot drive. So good thing UGreen included a screwdriver in the box so I can get to this panel. Now the pins aren't labeled, but one of them has a 0 on it, and I think that's ground. So I've got 4 wires. One is 3.3 volts, so I'm not going to use that one. And I'm just going to try ground and receive on both of the pins and boot it up and see which one is transmit. And that'll be safe, because the worst case I connect 2 receivers together, not a big deal. So here's option 1. I got the yellow connected to the 3rd pin. Not sure which is which. I also noticed now that circle that I thought was a ground is actually just part of this grid they have. So I don't even know which pin is pin ground. So now we're trying another pin out. I've only got 4 possible combinations. Oh, yep, here we go. So I'll take a picture of the pin out and tell you guys. Okay, so I can log in as my system user, the one I created that's an administrator, on the serial console, but I still didn't get any access to the BIOS. I will say though, this system is just running Debian already. So unless their update messes with your stuff, it is currently running Debian. But I like to run my own Debian. So now that I've found the NVMe drive here, I'm just going to move this over from the boot drive slot to one of the other ones so I can access it more easily. So I will also say some of the models use eMMC. There is a second screw hole here I didn't realize underneath this SSD, and that might be where the eMMC drives go. There doesn't appear to be any place to solder one. They probably did not intend for you to use it with the case off upside down. with no drives in it. But that's what I do here on Apple Art's Adventures. So, if we power this guy up, this is just doing keyboard and mouse. There's no mounted drive here. And my Vento drive is not plugged in. We get to the BIOS screen. So one thing I'll note too, this does have a hardware watchdog monitor chip. So if the software does something stupid or gets a kernel panic, it'll reboot itself. That is a really nice feature to have, especially on a low-end piece of hardware. It does mean if you're not used to it, your system is going to reboot all the time if you just install plain Debian without setting up the watchdog. If you come into the BIOS, which requires you have no other bootable devices because there's no way to force it to enter it, you can disable the watchdog here. So the first boot option by default is that internal drive. So if you do want to boot from something else, you'll have to pull that internal drive to get to the BIOS, which means taking the shell off. Then you can enable USB boot as a higher priority device. So now that I did that, I'm going to try loading Debian over the USB from the BiKVM. Let's see if it comes up. Oh yeah, there we go. So given that I can boot into a Debian installer, I have another SSD. I'm sure you could program this SSD if you wanted, but I want to keep this image, so I have a copy of UGreen's OS for the future. So I'm going to put this SD in the OS slot, program Debian on it, and get it booted up. So before I run the installer for real, I'm going to turn off the watchdog. The watchdog will probably trip and reset during the install process, so let's just get that turned off. Of course, once we're done with the install, we can re-enable it. Then our system will have watchdog protection, just like the original did. Okay, Debian finished. It's going to reboot into its system. See how it works. So given that I was able to install Debian on this system, I have a high degree of confidence that Proxmox and TrueNAS, which are both Debian-based, will run on this. So essentially, do you think the UGreen hardware is worth the price they're asking to run your own software? And that's up to you to decide. If you're curious about the hardware specs, I'm going to have the lsUSBs, the lscpcis, and the lscpus all down below in the description, so follow the link down there to find them. So I hope you guys liked my deep dive on the UGreen NAS family. In general, my experience with the build quality of this unit is very good. I was impressed with how well it's built, all metal construction, how easy it is to take apart and expand. There's a nice door on the bottom with all of the expansion you need. Even if you want access to more, like the boot drive, it's not that hard to take the case off completely. The hardware doesn't appear to have any issues, at least on this model I've tested. Obviously I can't say for the other models, but there don't appear to be anything in the PCI tree that would bottleneck any of the I/O, for example. The 10 gigabit NIC is a Quantia-based, which is a NIC that I've had good luck with in the past. Hopefully you have as well. The software in general does not seem to be there yet. If you need basic file serving, this will do it. But anything more advanced, if you're running a media server, anything like that, Home Assistant, is not going to happen with the basic software. That said, I did not have any trouble installing Debian on this. So Proxmox, VE, and TrueNAS Scale are both Debian-based. They should install just as easily. So the question I guess you have to ask is this worth the amount they're asking for? So they currently, as of the release of this video, have discounted pricing for Kickstarter, so I'm not going to say the price. But down below I'll have a link to where you can buy it, and that'll obviously have the most up-to-date price. So you could compare this to things like a mini PC plus a disk shelf. It's got 4 SATA I/O direct to the PCIe bus, 2.5 and 10 gig. Both of those obviously work at lower speeds. But in general, I'm pretty impressed with this device. I might try to replace my TerraMaster NAS with it. I'm not entirely sure yet, or I'll just keep it for some Proxmox projects and things like that. But I'm sure you'll see it in my videos in the future. So anyway, if you guys enjoyed this content, I have a link to my Discord server down below. Feel free to ask any questions there about networking, Proxmox, those kinds of things. And as always, I'll see you guys on the next adventure.